Welcome to another DragonLance Saga Professionals episode. Today I'm being joined by Professor of Humanities and Liberal Arts at the University of Louisville and author Michael Williams. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. Good to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure of mine. I'm a big fan, and so it's really nice to be able to talk with you about not only hopefully what we're going to be covering today is a lot of the background of your history with Dragonlance, your other novels that you've written and stuff, but also maybe a little bit of tease about what's coming in the future of Dragonlance with you, and I guess ultimately whether or not you just want to push it off to the side, like you know what, I'm moving on. I'm done. But I'm sure we'll get there. For anyone who wants to join us live, you are welcome to throw up questions up in YouTube chat. And throughout the course of the conversation, whenever there's a nice organic break, we will, address those as well. And if you're catching this after the fact, sorry, but I hope you enjoy it. All right. Again, I'm a fan of the work that you've done, but also clearly this is a Dragonlance channel, and so I'm a massive fan about the world here. And I think unfairly, a lot of the attention goes directly to Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman as sole creators of this world, when in truth there's a whole team behind the entire world, the whole campaign itself. And I want to talk to you about some, notes that you wrote in Dragon in the Archives about, how you initially became known as a writer to yourself and the public at large. But before that, how did you even get started with TSR? What was your role when you first started working there?
Oh gosh,
We're going back.
I knew Larry Elmore as a friend of a friend, and I had heard that they were hiring editorial staff at TSR. I was in a position at the university where I thought that a change was in the offing. So I sent a job application there and signed on as an editor at TSR. I knew a little bit about the games. I had played the games on occasion. I played the games a lot more once I got there. And I gradually settled into a job of editing the game modules. That's where I started.
Nice.
Shared an office with a guy named Tim Kilpin and with Tracy Hickman, who had come a few months before me from Utah with this huge volume of maps, which I saw over his shoulder on occasion. I didn't know what they were to begin with, but I thought they looked very cool.
Yeah.
And of course, this were some of the initial maps of Krynn that he and his wife Laura had worked upon and had apparently discussed and developed in their car trip from Utah to Wisconsin. So I was there when Dragonlance was initially being mapped out. Was on the original design team as an editor. Where oddly enough, I don't believe Margaret was present to begin with, because the initial stages of the project were game modules.
Yeah.
Not long after that, within a couple of months after that, she comes on board along with Tracy, and the company begins to look for somebody to write Dragonlance-related novels, not knowing initially that they had the really good choices right in front of them, which is very often the case. You go searching afar, and there right under your nose is the person you've been looking for all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of a lead-in to everything that involved me with Dragonlance, at least.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a little bit more about that, because coming in as an editor, did you have any designs to do any writing, or was it really just the role of editor of proofreading and mild copywriting on there?
Well, they wanted it to be proofreading and mild copywriting. The problem was
Never
that
ends up that way.
sometimes you have a little bit more of a situation where a piece of writing demands more structural attention, questions about plotting, questions about characterization, just
Mhm.
like you would as fiction editor. So some of my first experiences as an editor there were spent wrangling with people who uh, thought they were writers,
Mhm.
and some of them who actually became writers, and were probably as deluded about it at that time as I was deluded about being an editor. So we had this weird back and forth where we both kind of learned from each other.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the best way to learn anything, really, is on the job,
Hands
sort
on,
of
yeah.
ebbing and flowing with others' perspectives and stuff. Just out of curiosity, is there a big difference between, because you're now a novelist, you've written a lot of novels and short
Yeah,
stories and poetry.
yeah.
When you're approaching uh, game modules, is there any real difference in in the way that you approach novels, either writing or editing? Yeah, I guess from a technical side of things.
Sure. There's a technical underpinning, a sort of skeletal arrangement, numerical arrangement that you have
Mm,
to keep in mind with the game module. That's really not an issue in prose fiction of any sort or in poetry, although numbers do come in terms of maybe word count and
right.
syllable count in poems. But
Yeah.
seriously, it's you know, you've got the whole aspect of game mechanics
Hmm.
that implicates almost everything that you do. Uh, so, uh, so you not only make the story viable and believable, but you have to make it playable. And
Right.
that was a juggling act that I had to learn in the process of doing this, as I'm sure that the game designers had to learn a little bit more about the writing side. So we kind of met in the middle, and at the best moments, I think there was a kind of synthesis that worked pretty well.
Yeah. When were you first tapped to write original poetry for the novels or the
I
campaign?
tapped I tapped it my damn self.
You just
uh,
sort of jumped in.
I had published two or three poems before this, a couple of them in smaller, sort of university related
Mhm.
publications, a couple in American Review. So there was some pretty good places I'd published in,
Yeah.
and I've been working on some stuff on the side, and I just thought, you know, uh, Tolkien always wrote his own poems and songs for The Lord of the Rings, for The Hobbit.
Hmm.
I didn't see anybody doing this in Dragonlance. I didn't think that they were particularly interested in doing this. And I thought, that's an option for them. And I thought it's something I might like to try my hand at. So I cornered Tracy in a snowy parking lot. He was putting something in the trunk of his car, and asked him if he would like to see some poems
Oh
related to
wow.
the book. And Tracy, being a nice guy, said, "Well, sure,"
Yeah.
not knowing what he was going to get. And
Right.
from what Margaret told me, her first reaction was, "Oh my God, I don't poems from somebody I don't even know. I don't want to even think about it." But
Hmm.
it worked out
It's like someone
both of them
slipping you a
pretty well.
script as
Yeah.
a filmmaker. Now read my book. That's really fascinating. I did not know that came from outside of Tracy as the instigator, but that's like the whole Canticle of the Dragon and the
Yeah.
poetry infusion of Dragonlance is what gave it that epic scope
Well, thank
initially.
you.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
to your credit of referencing Tolkien, that's what made his work feel otherworldly. It was, and with
I agree.
Dragonlance specific, it's the history that everyone developed throughout the time of developing Dragonlance originally, and then your poetry and your songs. And
Right.
I mean, did you ever imagine going through this, and maybe even now, looking back, that was what would help propel it because it was sort of all cylinders firing with great artwork, fantastic story writing, immersive poetry and songwriting. I mean, you sort of had everything going at once.
I think it was in a lot of ways a matter of great good fortune.
Mm,
Tracy was and is an imaginative genius.
yeah.
Uh, Margaret is a superb popular novelist.
Mhm.
Larry is, I think, a remarkable artist, and so you had
Right.
this kind of perfect storm of talents that just happened to be there at the right time, and it became a kind of team-like effort in that Margaret would send me a note saying, "We need a poem about this." In some cases, I didn't know what the plot was at the particular point because they were writing on the wing. I was providing poetry, and it became evident to me that that didn't necessarily apply. That one of the criticisms, or didn't matter. One of
Mhm.
the criticisms of the poetry on occasion has been, well, it's not directly related to the plot line, but it doesn't need to be. I don't think it. I think what it did was establish an atmosphere, a context, the idea that the people of Kryn would sing songs and tell stories, and they might sound something like this.
Yeah.
What it did was necessarily deepen the world, I hope, but I don't think that it drove along the story as much as certainly as much as Margaret Tracy did, but certainly as much as well, even some of the role playing that generated the plot line
Yeah.
that they did in sessions at Margaret's house at night.
Yeah. You had written in Dragons in the Archives collection that you sort of owed your writing career to Margaret Weiss.
Yes.
Can you expand on that? Because you were writing before that. What was it about that interaction with TSR with her that made you feel like she had an involvement with that?
Oh my gosh. I what I am as a writer owes so much to Margaret that it's almost beyond expression. An extraordinarily talented and generous spirit.
Hmm.
I've known few people in my life who were as good a people as Margaret Weiss is.
Wow.
But what she did is she gave me a venue, an opening.
Hmm.
She gave me places where my work could pass under sets of eyes that it would not have passed under. I wouldn't know where to send a manuscript that might be most amenable to some people, to some reader, to some editor. And Margaret was right there to kind of start me off. She had given me a platform to
Hmm.
begin with, uh, and it was up to me, obviously, to run with that. But she seemed to know the kinds of things that I could do. She seemed to intuit that. Maybe she is, as I suspect, as cagey a reader as she is a writer,
Yeah.
and so she knew kind of not only what was good about my work, but maybe where it could be positioned in developing the career of a younger writer.
Um, Professionally speaking, do you find that it's really important to be able to take the criticism in your writings? I mean, I know a lot of people tend to get really attached to their work when they, initially create it, and criticism is kind of difficult for some people. But do you
Yeah.
feel that it's a muscle that needs to be developed?
Yes, I do. I think that oddly enough, Dragonlance rises into prominence about the time of the beginning of the internet.
Yeah.
And this is a time when exchanges of opinions, critical opinions, becomes extremely widespread and I think largely irresponsible.
Mm,
So you have to be really discerning, really take a look and be honest with your work and be honest with the criticism in order to benefit from it.
mm,
Now, you know, I've always told my students not only in terms of literature, but in terms of almost anything that they go into. When you're on the internet, never read the comments. It will just it'll destroy any faith that you have in the human spirit.
Yeah.
Um, and the same thing happens with criticism. Especially since criticism has become rather widespread,
Mm.
and in some cases, I think kind of ill-informed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But amid all of this is some criticism, both positive and negative. I think that where people are on the ball, and you know it when you see it.
Hmm.
It's intuitive, it's sharp. It indicates that the critic has not only read other Dragonlance stuff, but have read other speculative fiction, have read other fiction, have
Hmm.
read widely in literature, has know what's good, what's not good, and if they find something that's not good in your work, you better damn well address it and begin to think about it and maybe do something about it.
Yeah. Um, well, let me ask you really quick about the fandom because you've been involved with it for since the beginning, the Dragonlance
Almost
fandom,
40
and
years. Yeah.
yeah, in traditional fandom circles, people tend to sort of become hyper focused on the fandom they're involved with. And
Yeah,
so,
sure.
do you find many of the Dragonlance fans that approach you or engage with you online, are they read in other areas of fiction or nonfiction, or does it feel to you like they are very hyper specialized just with Dragonlance?
You know, I love that they love and cherish
Mhm.
Dragonlance. I think that uh, every time that a Dragonlance fan approaches me and begins to talk about the world of Kryn, I think about the way that I was at 13 or 14 years old when I first encountered Tolkien,
Yeah.
and that how dear that was, the trilogy
Mhm.
especially was to me. As a matter of fact, the first years at University of Louisville, I cornered a senior faculty member in a third floor men's bathroom and would not let him leave until he admitted that Tolkien was an important fiction writer. Uh, it's a combination, I think, of idealistic, valiant, and creepy, and so I understand that
Mhm.
enthusiasm, uh, and it varies about how much they have. These fans have explored other kinds of storytelling, other kinds of fiction. Excuse
Yeah.
me, but I usually tend to respond to people who are reading other stuff as well,
Right.
and it makes me happier. It makes for a more pleasant exchange and conversation, I think.
Well, as far as your opinion on whatever the phrase a healthy reader would mean to you, do you think it's important that people diversify what they consume? I mean, I know, when we talk about, humanities as a species, I think it's important to engage in a myriad of perspectives and
Yeah,
interests. When it comes to reading, people do tend, they start when they're young and they find what they like and they tend to stick what they like. But do you think, as from your professional opinion, is it important that people push out of those safety bounds as a reader?
absolutely. Have your first love,
Hmm.
and if you like, keep your first love. One of my first loves was Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars novels, and I blush to admit it in some ways now because some of them are so god awful. Uh, but uh, but there's still something within those first books that you read
Hmm.
that has a bearing on the person that you become. And there's nothing wrong with continuing to love those books. Uh, you do more for yourself as a human being and as a developing mind and imagination to stretch yourself,
Yeah.
to explore. Read some 19th century novels. Read some literary essays. Read poetry.
Hmm.
Uh, the way that you stretch yourself also tends not only to broaden you but to deepen you. And I think that once that's done, that it's all part of growing and learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Speaking of growing, and specifically for you as a writer, at what point did you decide to write your own fiction, to dive into that? And was it intimidating for you initially?
Oh gosh, yes. Uh, uh, Actually, I hadn't written, but I wrote a couple of pieces for Amazing Stories under a
Oh,
pseudonym because
wow.
I was very shy, and it's one of those cases that if I told you, I'd have to kill you, you know. But I do like them still. But an editor at TSR, Pat McGilligan, uh, got in touch with me when they were doing the anthologies,
Hmm.
and I'd done a couple of narrative poems for the first anthology, and then he asked, said, "Would you like to write a piece of fiction for the second anthology?" I said, "Do you have anything on hand?" I said, "Yes." Of course, I didn't, but I immediately got to work on it.
Yeah.
And so my first couple of pieces of prose fiction were actually in those Dragonlance
Oh,
anthologies. And
wow.
yes, it was one of those situations where you just step out and try to do it.
Mm.
And I was every time I've started any kind of project, I start by flying by the seat of my pants. I don't There's things I don't know about doing the project that I learn in the process of doing it.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you think the prose fiction was scary, you think the first couple of short stories. Try when McGilligan asked me later, "Do you have a draft of a novel?" And I lied to him again, and then wrote Weasel's Luck
Yeah.
by the seat of my pants. I didn't know anything about how to write a novel, and I learned as I went along. I thought about what had sounded good to me, and tried in some ways to approximate it. And I think I ended up with a pretty decent first novel, but
Mhm.
it was an adventure all the way.
It's a bit of a, I'm sure it was a bit of a chore as well, right?
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, when we were going through the final drafts, McGilligan had a copy of the manuscript. Of course, you sent hard copy at that time, and typescript.
Mm.
About It was 600 pages that we gradually whittled down.
Yeah.
But he had it in front of him, and we were making some of the final uh, edits on one part of it. It was like midnight, and I hear on the phone the voice of a small kid,
No.
and his little boy had come into the room, and Pat leaned away from the phone and talked to the little boy, and I heard him laugh. And he comes back and he says, "I was talking to Bowie, and he said, 'What you doing, Dad?' And I said, 'I'm working with this man who wrote this novel.' And he said, 'See it?' And he pointed to it, and it said, Bowie said, 'He wrote that?' And Pat said, 'Yes.' And Bowie said, 'He must be very tired.'"
Right on the
And
money.
by that time, I really was. So
Yeah, I bet. Um, okay, so we talked about feedback originally, criticisms, and
yeah,
certainly
yeah.
getting it from the fans with the burgeoning internet and stuff. Um, did you feel, were you happy with the reception of Weasel's Luck when you initially put it out into the world?
No, but I became happier later.
Yeah.
Because it's odd how responses to a novel will become available to you.
Mhm.
Uh, some of the first things that I read were not very complimentary.
Mhm.
They didn't like the central character. They didn't like the way that he went on. Uh, they didn't like this. They didn't like that. The funny thing was that later on, the reviews became better and better. And later on, some of those reviews came back from the same people who'd panned the novel, said, "I picked that up again, and I liked it a lot better."
Right.
And it's funny. I guess it's a novel that can strike you one way or another, but maybe improves as you live with it, as it rests with you. At
Mhm.
least I hope that's its fate with some of the people who've read it.
I think a lot of the time people just bring baggage with them, right? I mean, and you can't really avoid it, wherever
Yeah,
you are in your life, whenever you approach something new, whatever expectations there are behind what you're doing, you bring all of that to the work that you're sitting down to read, and you're going to inevitably taint the experience with what you bring with you rather than taking on its face value. And to your point, I think revisiting work is when you can really get that clear slate of experience with the volume itself rather than everything else. And certainly with Dragonlance, as a young man, I would ride my bike to the library, and I would just spend hours in the library
yeah,
going from book to book on the shelves, sort of totally out of sequence, out of order, no concern about that, which is where I initially read your Weasel's Luck. And it was the immersion in a whole new world that I was focused on rather
how
than
about it? Yeah,
whether I
how
like a
about it?
particular character or not, because I that didn't matter to me. It was a
Oh,
totally different experience.
well, I just wish that more readers had been like you, because the thing I think that uh, one of the things that is remarkable about otherworld fantasy is the other world.
Yeah.
Uh, that the world itself becomes a kind of character.
Mm.
And you get to know it gradually, like you get to know a character in a story. You become acquainted with different aspects of it.
Yeah.
The character unfolds and develops in front of you, and a world does that the same way as your protagonist does. And it's most obvious, I think, in alternate world fiction, but I think it happens in more realistic fiction as well.
Mhm.
It's one of the qualities that I would agree with you is really the fun thing about reading fiction, is to find yourself absorbed in the world that you've entered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of and I got some imagery here of, the first trilogy that you put together, and then another collection of writings. Um, when you were starting these different volumes, were there, what was going on in your life where, did your life influence any of the outcome of the story, or was it just you immersed in this other world as we were just speaking to?
You know, you have these two series
Yeah.
paired together, of which I
At very
think
different times.
the Arcady Alamanda series is quite a bit better, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think that the Thief to King series is a kind of a kind of conventional Arthurian um, kind of episode,
Right.
archetypal journey of as the overtitle would indicate, from Thief to King,
Right.
of a sort of a street urchin who ends up becoming the king, who was always the king and didn't know it. I
Hmm.
mean, it has Arthurian tropes in it,
Oh yeah.
and I think that the best thing about it, it's got a great villainess named Ravenna. Uh, Other than that, it's a competent, but I don't think it's especially inspired
Hmm.
trilogy. Arcady and Alamanda take an idea, though, that I was developing in the Thief to King trilogy, and give it a better focus.
Hmm.
In Thief to King, magic is poetry, and poetry is magic. You find that in the story, the characters who use magic use recognizable poetry, usually 19th century poetry. There's an assassin in there who uses Baudelaire's poetry in the original
Oh.
French. So it's got some fun things that I was doing at the time.
Hmm.
I take that idea and make it the central premise of the Arcady and Alamanda books, in which uh, there is a sort of post-apocalyptic world
Hmm.
in which the prophetic books of William Blake have been discovered and have served as the foundation of a religion.
Oh, wow.
And the doctrine is disputed as say, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls
Yeah.
might have been disputed in our own history. So both the scripture and the magic of Arcady and Alamanda come from the prophetic books of William Blake and also the poetry of other contemporary romantics. So I was able to focus in those two books the kind of thing that I was experimenting with in the trilogy. So the trilogy, though it's kind of uneven, I think was good preparation for what I did in some more successful books with Arcady and Alamanda.
It very much seems to me, yeah, I mean, I'm from an visual arts background.
Yeah.
You're taking a lot of these themes that are traditionally explored in visual arts and applying them in your literature. It seems a much
How
more,
so? How so?
well, I don't, and, just the way that you're applying these thematic ideas,
Yeah.
that, you're taking a little bit of real world connection and spinning it out into a sort of fantasy of your own making. That I, I would like to think that that's a common thing, but it does very much sound very different and original the way you're describing it. Did you take that same sort of approach of this sort of literary, artistic approach with your newest collection, the City Quartet?
Yes. It's. I think I think this is a question of almost of temperament
Hmm?
when I approach these books. There's a city in the city of Quartet that is and is not my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, nice.
Uh, it's Louisville. Historically, it's Louisville as imagined. It's Louisville in whatever potential for myth this sort of mid-sized city has, and it is, like I was saying about alternative world fantasy, the city itself is a character.
Mhm.
These are four separate stories. You can start the quartet with any of these books. They're Trajan's Arch, Vine and Urban Legend, Dominic's Ghosts, and Tattered Men. You can start with any of them. You find, for example, you find in Trajan's Arch, you'll see out of the corner of your eye events that will develop and become central in another book.
Mm.
In another book of the quartet, so that the books are interlaced, having only the common ground in the city, and this interlocking and interweaving stories that are taking place at roughly the same time, which is from the late 1960s up until about 2017, 2018.
Mm.
Nothing about the Rona yet. But if I'm finishing up the fifth thing I'm working on, it will be involved in the whole story as well.
Nice. So when you're talking about this sort of shared world as it
Yeah.
was, and events in one novel maybe being present or experienced in another, how deep is that mixing? Is it sort of tangential background events happening at the same time, or is it woven into the central narrative of the individual stories?
It Yes, it
Yes,
varies
and.
varies from novel to novel.
Hmm.
For example, there are some scenes in Tattered Men that take things from Trajan's Arch and run with them.
Hmm.
That some moments that seem tangential in Trajan's Arch become profoundly important in Tattered Men. But you don't have to read Trajan's Arch to understand Tattered Men, or vice versa.
Right.
I'd like for you to, but you can. Each novel stands on its own.
Hmm.
They have common characters. Uh, Primary characters in one novel become secondary characters in another. Uh, on one occasion, one novel shares two novels share a primary character, Vine and Tattered Men. One of the principal characters is a principal in both of those,
Oh, nice.
but they're all interconnected, interwoven.
Yeah. I love that. And then, of course, just coming from a visual arts background, I love the visual connection of them all
Yeah.
as we're seeing here as well. And I guess my question is going to, sort of go back to the earlier bit of our conversation when you said that you weren't always involved or didn't always know about the totality of the poems that you were supposed to be writing. Visually, when the art director came up with this design, were they aware of the interconnectedness of everything, and I guess to what detail? I mean, it was.
Yes. Yes. The art was preceded by my talking to the artist, young man named Anggar. He is a Indonesian artist. Uh, this was mapped out with my publisher uh, over a dinner of paella and rum at
Oh
a
no.
Cuban restaurant in southern Indiana. And I came to the table and I explained my idea of wanting these books to interconnect in ways that were not a series or a sequence,
Hmm.
but that were kind of like the action of a quartet, of a musical quartet that had a
Right.
simultaneity to it. And Holly Filippi, who is the business manager of our publishing company and is also the girlfriend of the chief executive Steven Zimmer. Holly was at the table with me and my wife, and she says, I was thinking, would there be a way to make the covers relate to one another? So together, and stoked by rum and enthusiasm, we mapped out what you see on the screen here, that the books, when put together, form a mandala.
Oh, that's great.
And the Buddhist meditative circle. Uh, my Indonesian artist, though a Muslim, understood exactly what I was wanting in this,
Yeah.
and he presented these covers to me in the slide that you see.
Hmm.
Okay, so that it has really strong implications for a reader of the book, that you see that that you can start with any of these books and enter into kind of the narrative center, which is this depth and darkness and cosmic beauty right at the center of the screen.
Yeah. Well, I find it very interesting that you're bringing this idea of the quartet, the musical aspect of it, and coming from this number-based idea, as you mentioned earlier, about poetry. Do you think
Yeah.
that's where you're getting that sort of musical beat reference intrinsically from? Is your background as a poet?
Uh, to some degree, I think it's also because I like chamber music.
Mm, nice.
And I like the way that in a piece of chamber music, especially from the Romantic period,
Hmm.
as you can gather from Arcady and Alamanda, I'm a romantic, but especially from that period where ostensibly very different musical lines will coincide, develop, and begin and end together in ways that I always found aesthetically pleasing and pleasing to my ear, pleasing to my imagination as well. And I wanted the books to kind of do that.
Yeah. So it has been some time since you've been involved specifically with Dragonlance, and I wanted to go like show everyone
Yeah.
the different novels that you had worked on and written. And I don't really necessarily want to go through each and every one of them or anything like that, but just to show people that your background with Dragonlance is very much involved from the beginning, from poetry to lyrics to short stories, and ultimately to these really wonderful novels. Um, Do you have any pieces, any works that you reflect on with any greater pride than others?
Well, I think Weasel's Luck and also the sequel, Galen Benighted,
Hmm.
are will always have a place in my heart. Weasel's Luck being the first novel, it was exciting and scary to write, as I was
Yeah.
saying a little earlier. Uh, it uh, the sequel had its own challenges because I hadn't intended to do a sequel, and they wanted uh, further adventures
Yeah.
of Galen Pathwarden, and so I had to think, well, where was he when we ended? And what would happen next? And I had to think it in ways that you don't really think of those questions in a self-contained narrative. I had to
Right.
find a way to extend his story that would be satisfying to a reader and satisfying to me. Those two were a lot of fun. Uh, they are still a lot of fun for me to look back over. I still am kind of proud of them. Also, Oath in the Measure too. The story of Sturm, whom
Yeah.
I always had a love-hate relationship with
I
because
think
I thought he
everyone
was
does.
just yeah, I just thought he was just too good,
Yeah.
and it was kind of fun to visit him and to discover how he got that way.
Mm. Yeah, I love the development of a character, regardless of the medium that it takes place in, because there's always this human connection, which is why we can, so easily lose ourselves in them, or find ourselves drawn or repelled by them so
Yeah,
much. I mean, Sturm is a shared one throughout everyone I've ever talked to, of whether they really, really love him or they really don't like him. But the fact that you react is testament to the character itself.
yeah, I agree.
Um,
I agree.
so you were mentioning, when you were writing it, you were keeping in mind the audience, um, but ultimately, do you feel a writer is is are writers too hyper focused on what the audience is going to think about, or is it something where you're just doing this because you need to get it out?
For me, writing is more exploration,
Hmm.
is more a sense of expression and exploration, and the hope that readers will find what I'm doing interesting.
Hmm.
Sometimes they don't, but but I always do before it's before it's printed. I'm at the point that I think this has been well done. Sometimes I may have been mistaken,
Hmm.
but the principle. I think of a quote from Robert Frost, which was what no excitement for the writer, no excitement for the reader, and I trust in that kind of commonsensical judgment
Yeah.
that if I'm liking it, there are going to be readers somewhere who will share that taste and inclination.
Oh, that's great. Have you noticed any um, changes in readers? I mean, clearly we have gone to a much more digital approach, as far as changes in that aspect. But and I'm asking you because I genuinely don't know, but I suspect that there would be an attention deficit nowadays as well. We're so hyper focused as a culture on internet memes and some short form video, that
Yeah.
the idea of sitting down to long form works, it anecdotally, it seems like it would be more challenging. Is that true to your experience as well?
Yes. I wonder how content younger readers are with the kind of novel that I read
Mhm.
growing up. And by that, I don't mean subject matter. I mean in the style of telling.
Right.
There was a kind of, for example, Thomas Mann at the beginning of Buddenbrooks has like 70 pages of this dinner party which is so interesting because you're learning about the characters, the implications of what's going on. You feel as though you're looking over people's shoulders. You don't quite have the story yet, but you're kind of intuiting this. I don't think that readers today have the kind of patience that people at the beginning of the
Understand what just happened. Um, all right, it does seem like we're back now, though. Wow, that was crazy.
I can see you.
Okay, good. We're partway there. It does seem like we're back, though. I apologize about that, everyone.
No, that's a problem.
And it totally interrupted your flow, too. You were talking about attention spans and how our modern day
Yeah.
reader may not have that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are bogged down in Tolkien,
Hmm.
which I can't imagine. I've always told students that I thought one of the things that Tolkien did really remarkably is he has a wedding of European fairy tale and folklore with the form of the 19th century novel.
Mm.
So I think that Lord of the Rings is probably the last great 19th century novel, even though it's started in 1937 and finished in the mid 1950s.
Right.
And there's a pacing to that storytelling that ends up losing the attention of a lot of readers, say under the age of 30, I would guess.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to the idea that we should, as I'm assuming it's still being done, but when I was in school, you were forced to read classic literature. Do you think that is something that we should continue down the path of, or do you think we should change that up to a more modern approach to writing and reading?
I don't know what the more modern approach would be. I think that I don't think it hurts to read, The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. I don't think it hurts to read Dickens.
Mhm.
There are, I think that one of the things that it can do is acclimate an attention span.
Yeah.
I think that it's good to move slowly, to dwell with a kind of storytelling. I don't think that a story has to be, a series of car chases and then Keanu Reeves spinning in bullet time.
Right.
And snarky comments intervene. I think that you have time to let a story settle and develop with you, and I think that the best reading, at least for me, comes from those moments of a more gradual
Hmm.
and intense engagement in the world you've consented to enter.
Yeah. Yeah, I reflect on some of the stories I've read. Like, I'm in the middle of the novel "Brand New Cherry Flavor." Some of the authors that I enjoy, being like a sort of avant-garde underground writer, UV Ray, where it is very much sort of immediate thought-driven narrative rather than explorative, descriptive writing. And
Hmm.
so it does take, I have to sort of reset my brain as I'm reading it to understand the new pacing that these authors are going through compared to, some of these more traditional Dragonlance novels, or going back to, even F. Scott Fitzgerald or Mark Twain.
Yep.
I mean, it's a
Yep.
very dramatically different tone, pacing, and form. And I guess that's what I was meaning when I was thinking of modern writing versus traditional writing, because it does seem just from my own anecdotal experience, it does seem different, and it takes
Well,
me time to get to it.
yeah, yeah, and this is not necessarily saying that that kind of writing is ineffective,
Right.
or that I don't like that kind of writing. What I'm saying is that there's a capacity in the more gradual, more unfolding narrations of traditional
Yeah.
fiction that does things to your mind when you read it, that
Yeah.
does things with your imagination, that allows you to settle and dwell and think about what you're reading in ways that the rapid fire kind of incandescent uh, stream of consciousness kind of writing
Right.
asks for other things.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about the more traditional approach that you take and you're referencing is that it does give you an opportunity to breathe and to sort of experience really visually as you're reading it, but also when it does pick up, when there is moments of frantic experience, you're feeling that even more in juxtaposition to the more, relaxed and calm descriptive prose. And I love that it's the story that's driving you to emotion rather than you just going through it. Just sort of like, okay, well, this just happened. Now this just happened. Now this just happened. It doesn't matter about pacing, as far
Right.
narrative pacing. I like that you can get swept up in a novel and find yourself reading slower in bits that are intended to be slower and quicker in parts that are just more frantic and exciting. Um,
It's kind of symphonic.
yeah, exactly.
In
Going back to
its
music.
development, uh, that there are parts of a symphony or an opera,
Hmm.
for example, that allow you to relax,
Yeah.
and then bang comes the crucial, emphatic, dramatic moment in the symphony,
Yep.
or bang comes the aria in the opera, and those are moments that you've been awaiting, but they have to be established and prepared for
Yep.
by what surrounds them.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Um, well, whether people are ready for it or not, we are returning to Dragonlance. The world, whether they're prepared or not, it is coming. And you were, I mean, can you tell me how you came to be involved in this upcoming novel, Dragons of Deceit?
Margaret asked me to contribute some poems to the new novel, and she gave me uh, thematic cues, thematic prompts.
Hmm.
It wasn't the kind of situation where these characters are doing this. I'd like you to write a song that in some ways responds to that.
Right.
She gave me a more thematic, open-ended context. So I hope that the poems, though they may not be narratively tightly connected to what's going on in the fiction that surrounds them, they speak to the mood and the temperament and the themes of the book in which you'll find them.
So, we all know that this was in the process of being written for a very long time, and it went through some
Yep.
legal issues. At what point were you pulled into the project? Was it a while ago, or is it more recent?
About 2.5 years ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it has been some time.
It's
What was
been
it
some
like
time.
returning to Dragonlance after so long?
Oh, I was a secret agent again.
Oh,
The first, there was things that you couldn't say about it. I had to sign an NDA. I felt like one of Trump's mistresses or something. Uh, but I kind of had that experience in the original Dragonlance, because when it came out, I was kind of persona non grata at TSR at that time. I had left the company. We were with an independent company, and they thought we were horrible people. They ended up deciding deciding that we weren't. I mean, the people that worked there still liked us,
hmm.
the people that we'd worked with, but some of the upper echelon had thought we were pretty horrible. So the initial poems with Dragonlance were smuggled in to the manuscript, and Margaret paid me on the sly in
Oh wow.
envelopes. It was like something out of John le Carre, and it was kind of nice to return to it with a kind of aura of secrecy. There's things you can't talk about on this, which was kind of fun. But I just she gave me a few months, and I did the work, and we talked on a couple of occasions. I sent her what I'd done. She liked it, and there you are.
Oh wow. So is this something where you're looking forward to a revival of interest in this world that you helped establish, or maybe are you a little trepidation involved?
Yes, again, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
It's I I've done Dragonlance. Dragonlance. I have a lot to thank in Dragonlance. I've also done stuff after Dragonlance, and that's more where I am
Yeah.
right now. Though I really hope for the success of this, and I'm excited, and there's a feeling like old times, and you enjoy that kind of thing, but you're also doing your own thing because it's been 40 years.
Yeah.
You better be doing your own thing by now,
Yeah.
and I look forward to it. But who knows?
Mhm.
Uh, there's got to be a little trepidation because there's got to be a little danger in anything that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I like that it's here because it's going to once again reintroduce fans to your work and also to the this wonderful campaign world, um, both within and without of the campaign world, of course,
Yeah,
for what you've done.
yeah,
We have Scott here in the chat room. Thanks for joining live, by the way, saying, Mr. Williams, thank you for contributing to the world of Dragonlance and the many hours of enjoyment they had exploring Kryn. And I need to second that. Again, going back to the very beginning of our conversation with your poetry and adding depth and life to this fantasy world, it's a massive part of what people love, myself included, love about Dragonlance. So thank you so much for everything that you've done, and it's just a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to talk to you just for a little bit here, and get a little bit insight from you about not only Dragonlance but also your other work and stuff. And I want to let the audience know that there is a lot of other work that you have
yeah.
done, and it's available for anyone in all the different forms that books are available nowadays, digitally and
Right.
physically. Is there somewhere that you, somewhere online you would like to sort of tell people where they can find you?
Well, I it's a big corporate monster, but Amazon has everything,
Yeah.
and it also has a number of the audiobooks. Because several of the quartet have been produced. I think we produced three of them now, three of the
Oh,
four
that's great.
in audio form. So if readers are also listeners, that's a good opportunity for you. So I would send you to Amazon. I would send you also to Seventh Star Press,
Okay.
which is the press that's published the quartet. It's a small press. Uh, it's very enterprising. It's a small press has to scramble
Hmm.
quite a bit, and they've done some pretty impressive scrambling. So I would urge you to take a look at Seventh Star and visit their site as well.
Okay. I can add that link in the description as well. Well, thank you again so much for your time. It's been really fantastic and a real treat for me to talk with you today.
Oh gosh, well, thank you, and thank you, Scott. I forgot to mention. I appreciate hearing that. Even after 40 years, you kind of appreciate it when somebody says something nice about something you did back in the day.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have a very continued success in everything you're doing, and I look forward to reading the new poetry in Dragons of Deceit when it comes out in August next year. Have a fantastic night. Thank you again.
All right, have a happy New Year.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us live. I hope you had a lot of fun and learned a little bit. I implore you to go visit the links described and that are in the description. Read his work and formulate your own opinion. Ultimately, what's important is to expose yourself to the literature. So take some time and do so. It's never been more available than it is right now in our culture. So do yourselves a huge favor. Have a fantastic day. And until next time, Salam Javar.